And now, the survival show that once survived a mother-in-law who wouldn't stop bringing over plants. In this episode, we sit down with author Brad Manuel. He'll share with us how he crafted a different kind of post-apocalyptic book. There are no super elite Ranger SEALs, no ninja warriors, but somehow, it still caught the attention of the publishers of The Martian. So he might just be onto something. Howdy and welcome to In the Rabbit Hole's Urban Survival Podcast. This is episode number 199. I'm your host, Aaron, and you are in the rabbit hole. Safe and sound. Brad, welcome to In the Rabbit Hole.
Thank you, Aaron. Thanks for having me.
So you are Brad Manuel, not Manuel, as we were joking about a few minutes ago, and you are the author of The Last Tribe and your most recent book, Finding Daniel. But today we'll be focusing on The Last Tribe, and before we get into the book, let's find out more about you as a writer, and how did you come to writing?
Well, that's a great question, Aaron. I am lucky enough to have a wife who has a job with makes enough money and has benefits that can support us. And I was a stay-at-home dad, but that doesn't necessarily fill my day when the kids go to school. My wife and I had both had jobs, and we found that we couldn't make it really work with both of us out of the house or traveling. I was a consultant. I was in sales here as well. So she turned to me and said, "What do you want to do with your day? I don't want you to go back to work. That makes our lives worse." And I have always wanted to be a writer. I was an English major in college, went on to get an MBA and went into banking and nonprofit fundraising and consulting, et cetera. But in the back of my mind, I'd always wanted to get into writing, and had even gotten up in early hours when I had a job to do this. So I've been very lucky to have a supportive spouse who said, go for it. So I spent 2 years writing The Last Tribe and self-published on Amazon and went from there.
How has the self-publishing process been like?
Well, I will say that I spent a few months pounding my head against the wall trying to get a literary agent to even speak with me, which is difficult. So I am not one of those people that says I'm fiercely independent and I never wanted an agent. And if writers are telling you that, then they're just saying, I don't want money, because that's typically the way that you can make a lot of money is getting published by a big publisher. So I'd finally gotten through to an independent publisher, and he gave me the advice, no one's going to publish you a first-time author of an 800-page book because it's too expensive to print, which left me with the option to self-publish. I have found it to be, as far as getting the book online, extremely easy. So if you just want to write a book and put it online, Amazon, Kindle, Direct Publishing, KDP, if you go all the way to the bottom of Amazon, they have KDP, they have CreateSpace, which is how you can get print copies of your book. They make it so incredibly easy to go through those steps. You can create a cover there. You can do everything. It costs you zero money whatsoever. And you can get it up there. I've been lucky enough that I did that, and people picked it up and really enjoyed it, and it picked up a lot of momentum, and I've done well just self-publishing.
Cool. So was this The Last Tribe? Was it the first book you'd ever written?
It is. It is. I should amend my earlier statement that I told you. I'd certainly started quite a few books.
Mm-hmm.
This is the first book that I sat down and finished, and it's. I can see why people say it's difficult to finish a book, because you definitely hit mental blocks. And Aaron, I need you to stop me if I start sounding extremely pretentious, like I'm some sort of superhuman writer or something, because I hate that. But it is difficult to just sit there every day, 4 to 6 hours or however long you're doing it, if you can get that sort of dedicated amount of time, and really keep the story going and say, where I know where I want to go to, I know where I want to end. How do I fill in the pages? And that's what I found the most difficult. People ask, in your process, do you map it out? Do you have all these story arcs or things like that? And I have found that I don't do that. I typically have an ending, and I kind of let myself go there, and then I cut things out that don't make sense, and I send it to a few readers, and they tell me.
So what do you do to get into the writer's zone? Like, how did you have a process, like a Stephen King, like 12-step process to get yourself into the headspace of writing? Or is it just something you sit down and do? Or what is that like?
And just to give Stephen King more promotion, because he needs help.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
The book, the Stephen King on writing is a fantastic book.
Yeah.
And he does sort of walk you through, or walk a reader through, how, what does he do to become a writer? I have found, I also read, there's a Hemingway on writing, which is kind of a compilation of his articles on writing, because he didn't actually sit down and write that specifically. But he would, according to what he says, he would read everything he'd written and then go from there. Well, you're 600 pages into a book, it becomes difficult to reread every time you're going to sit down. I think because I've worked for 20 years before I've done this, I do look at it partly as a job. I sit down and say, I've got to write today. And whether it's good or bad, whether I use any of it, I at least have to exercise the muscles. And some days it's a lot easier to write and have it be what I want it to be. But I try not to use the cop-out that I'm not in the zone to not write. So I just try and write something every day.
That makes sense. I think that's probably one of the better practices I've heard. So going a little more into the book itself, as not too deep, but why dystopian fiction? How did you end up saying, you know what, I really want to write about the entire world dying?
World.
That sounds awesome and uplifting. And
I am a child. I'm 46. You don't know that, but I'm 46. And in the 70s and 80s, we had the threat of nuclear war seemingly all the time.
Yeah.
And one of the jokes, and I didn't put this in the book, or I did, and I cut it. My biggest fear from like 81 to 86 was that something was going to happen and I would be stuck with braces on for the rest of my life. and that was an actual fear that I had.
Exactly what you're talking about. Yes. Oddly enough, I can identify with that.
Yeah, not that everyone would be dead and, I would be a wandering nomad trying to find food. It was that braces would be on my teeth.
Yeah.
So I've always had that fascination with what would happen if. And I'm not as into the genre that I read everything that comes out, but one of my favorite movies of the last 10 years is 28 Days Later, which is, I don't know if it's necessarily a post-apocalyptic in the true sense, but it is certainly 3 or 4 people trying to survive in a horror landscape. The Stand is one of the first big books I've read that impacted me in the 80s. It's so I've always liked the genre. But, and we talked about this, the reason I wrote The Last Tribe is it seemed that there were 2 scenarios that I needed to follow. One was the zombie, the 28 Days Later, the, name Walking Dead, all these other. So there's a zombie, or it was going to be a road warrior, where there would be roving gangs of people with strength, guns, flamethrowers, really dominating the landscape. And I was frustrated and envisioned something like I wrote, which is, so The Last Tribe, I'll give a little background. It's the super flu. It's like The Stand, where it kills pretty much everybody. 1 out of 1 million is going to survive, or 1 out of 100,000 is going to survive. And you really, in a town, I live in Raleigh, North Carolina, we have about 1 million people here. So you start running the numbers, you're like, okay, so what, 1 person is going to live here, maybe 5? So you're going to wake up and you're going to be the only person in a pretty large area. And, North Carolina is 13 million-ish. So you've got this huge state, and there are going to be 20 people alive potentially. And in the vision of the book, there aren't gangs of people out to hunt you. I discuss those topics as things that the people who are alive are concerned about. What are we going to do? Do we want to go to Washington, D.C. to try and find other survivors? Because if we find other survivors, they might be bad people. Or in the book I discuss more, they might be annoying people. And you can imagine, you find someone, you're pretty much stuck with them forever. This isn't like where we are now. I mean, that's kind of a humorous, take on it, but you're married to that person.
Yeah,
Whoever you pick up.
Yeah, I thought that was a pretty funny aspect of the book, and I guess to get in a little bit and to give some for the readers, you kind of gave a bit already about it, but one of the reasons I really enjoyed your book was how different it was. It's not. Hey, listener, do you get at least $3 of value out of ITRH every month? Well, you should see what we give to the Armada members. Check it out today by visiting ITRH.net. Members get access to episodes a day early. And when you join, you'll receive an invitation to the secret ITRH Armada Facebook group so you can chat about survival with myself and other Armada members all day long. Get a free copy of the book, Owning Your Survival, so you can have a plan and do it right. Access to our famous Bob and emergency kits on-demand class. Make that perfect bag. Learn what to obsess over and, more importantly, what not to obsess over. Our insane ammo inventory spreadsheet. You'll finally have instant access to knowing what you've got on hand at any time. Access to every episode ever produced by ITRH, including one with a famous knife maker, which was never aired. And that's just to name a few things. Remember to visit ITRH.net to get more benefit and help the show stay safe and sound, which helps you stay safe and sound. Now, back to today's guest. One of the reasons I really enjoyed your book was how different it was. It's not, there's no action hero. There is a gun battle, but it's not a gun battle that the main characters are really involved in. It's something they kind of become aware of and things like that. And I try not to give too much away here. And there's no overt monster in the book either. And it's, I mean, unless you consider a germ a monster, I guess. But
yeah.
In fact, it's actually a book that I would feel pretty good letting just about any age kid read. And you had a funny thing that you were sharing with me the other day about a review you thought was good, which I think is kind of telling about the book. But let's get that, and then tell us why this exact not following with the herd.
So the review was, this is a Lifetime movie, post-apocalyptic
yes.
story. Which is, yes, it wasn't a positive review. I think it was 2 or 3 stars. But one thing I will say as a writer, and I don't have a lot of writer friends. I have 2 or 3 friends that have kind of jumped into this as well. I stopped reading the reviews pretty early on Amazon, and I'm on Audible, and I'll talk a little bit more about my lucky writing story, because there's more to it about that. But so it is a Lifetime movie, more or less, and there are, I would say, pockets of violence that are there. I tried to make it more of a character-driven book, and I felt like 28 Days Later was a little like that, although since it was a movie, it didn't have a chance to develop the characters as well as I necessarily was trying to do in my book. So really that was what I didn't realize that this was a whole genre, post-apocalyptic. When I put it on Amazon, I was looking at it as more as a family tale. And again, you can take the pretentious meter and ramp it up. My ideal book, what I was trying to do was, I loved the first 200 pages of The Stand. I thought it was just one of the most fantastic beginnings to a book, opening. And then when it got into the good versus evil stuff, it lost a lot to me. It kind of it morphed into something totally different from the beginning, which is fine. I mean, that's Stephen King. And I was trying to do the first 200 pages, but also in a Grapes of Wrath, which that was my pitch, which did not work when I was trying to find an agent or a publisher. But it's a combination of The Stand and the Grapes of Wrath, which is, if your listeners haven't read that book, that is one of the first post-apocalyptic books.
Yeah.
It is just absolutely fantastic. It's a family that has lost their farm, and they have no money and no food, and they have to get on a truck, and they bring everybody with them, and they got to try and find somewhere to live and get food. And it is exactly like all the post-apocalyptic novels you read now. It's just, someone trying to survive in a barren landscape. And so that's what I was trying to do and The Last Tribe. I have 4 brothers, adult brothers, survive the plague. And before the phones go dead, before the electricity turns off, they agree to meet in their hometown in New Hampshire, and they're spread across sort of the Midwest and East Coast. And so the last thing they have to do is survive whatever they need to survive, if they do, because you don't know if they're going to all survive at that point, and then get to New Hampshire, which, again, I make jokes about, how horrible a prepping idea is that. Let's go to New England. Let's go to the coldest, shortest growing season place in the world, or at least not in the world, but certainly in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
Let's go up to northern New Hampshire. What a great idea. But they can't change their plan at that point. They have to follow through. And certainly, if you're on the East Coast, that means you go through every major city. You're going through D.C., New York, Baltimore, you're just, it's Boston if you want to go up that way. So it's a bad idea, but then it's one, as preppers might say, you have your plan and you got to stick to it.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have other people involved and you can't get a hold of them, you then have to decide, am I going to follow through and hopefully meet the people I want to meet, or am I going off on my own and leaving them stranded potentially to die up there?
Right.
And that's a little bit a part of the book as well,
mm-hmm.
that's driving them.
So walk us into it a little bit more. And I guess let's to start it off. So you have this family, and I guess so kind of take it from there and walk us into it. And I thought that was really interesting about the Grapes of Wrath. That actually gives me personally, now that I have read your book, it gives me more context and more of a sense of structure of what you were doing there. But walk us into it a little bit more of like kind of from the beginning.
Okay. What I have in the beginning is, and I will make the joke that is part of my family joke now. I have 3 brothers, and I live in Raleigh. And I start the book as a father with 2 young children who's in Raleigh, and the only place in the United States that's having this super plague that is wiping out the rest of the world is Raleigh, North Carolina. So the whole town is fleeing. And the father's son, who is 5 or 6 in the book, comes down with the flu. And so he has to make decisions. Do I get in the car now and get on the highway and get stopped by government agencies that are stopping people to take their temperature to see if they have to quarantine them, et cetera? Or, do I ride it out here? What are the decisions I have to make to try and keep my family together and survive this whole thing? So that's where I start. And he calls his other 3 brothers, who are not experiencing any flu problems at this point. They just are watching helicopter scenes from Raleigh as people just flood out. And he tells them, I don't know what I'm going to do, but I think we should plan to meet up in New Hampshire. And I start fast forwarding about 2 weeks at a time or 3 weeks at a time through the family phone calls saying, all of their families end up dying except for themselves. And some of their children, their wives die, adopted daughters die. And the funny part is my sister-in-laws don't read the book because of this. They are furious that I have killed off any non-manuals, and I try to explain this is not a book about our family. This did not really happen. You're all still alive. I was just using the familiar to use head count. So phones are gone, electricity's gone, sort of that post-apocalyptic scenario.
Mm.
Not many people, they've escaped the government. They have to now try to figure out when and they are going to head to this small town in New Hampshire where they all grew up, Hanover, New Hampshire, where I did in fact grow up, and my parents still live there. And they have to start making decisions as to when and then how are they going to get there? Are they going to decide to look for other people, other survivors? Are they just going to try and get up there and figure it out from there? Because I think that's sort of the rational questions and decisions you'd have to make in that post-apocalyptic scenario. And Aaron, when you and I were talking earlier, you asked, are you a prepper? And I'm not in the traditional sense, or probably in any sense whatsoever, a prepper. But I purposefully did not research this too much, the prepping culture too much, because I wanted to write the book as if these are 4 people that live that are not preppers, that don't have guns, that don't have a food supply, a freeze-dried food supply, or however you want, that are really behind the 8 ball and have to make decisions based on that.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't to look to a wider range of people that would want to read the book, but it was from my perspective, because that's who my family is right now, and that would be the bent on the genre that you're talking about, that I don't have the commando that is going to show up and teach everybody how to make guns out of soap or something like that. Or you don't have the Rambo that can go out in the woods and hunt and do all that. They're going to have to learn all of this as they go along and hope that their food survives before they don't figure this out, I should say.
So, and that's kind of interesting. Did the process of writing the book, because I know when I've gone on the occasional post-apocalyptic book listening marathon that I typically do around New Year's, I don't know why I have this tradition, but then I find myself feeling rather, shall we say, batshit crazy by the time I'm done delving into that world. Did you experience that? Since you're not a prepper and you're not somebody who is thinks about it and spends a lot of time with your head in that space normally and hasn't become desensitized to it, did you find that the process of writing the book kind of made you feel crazy?
It's definitely an interesting situation to be in. Yes, because when I visit the places that I write about, I definitely look at it differently. I write about, the Manchester airport being turned into an army base and then finding, thousands of dead bodies, because that's, part of, and Central Park, certainly when they go to New York, towards the middle of the book, they find a mass grave. And it's not like a mass grave like, oh, this, hole is covered over. It's like, no, there are like 1 million bodies piled on top of each other. It's just a mountain of dead bodies, because that's sort of the scenario that I envision, that before the complete collapse and the government's trying to find a cure, they've got to figure out what to do with all these people that are dead. Got to put them somewhere. I mean, it's not, I would say, yes, I began to look at the world differently and still do consider what would I do if scenarios. I think of that much more now. And I still joke with my kids, whenever we fill the car up, okay, we're ready for the apocalypse now, full tank, that sort of thing. Of a family joke. But I will say that even though I'm not a prepper, one of the things that I did consider at the beginning, and you can tell me if this is insulting or not, it's a bit of a counterculture that will make decisions against the norm. And when I thought about the first family that is in Raleigh that's trying to figure out what to do and the whole city's fleeing, the father, Todd, he makes decisions more, I think, like a prepper would, very on the fly, rather than what, I don't want to say normal, because I don't want to imply that preppers are abnormal, but what a regular citizen would do and think. And just a regular citizen they have a sick child, the whole city's fleeing because they're afraid the virus is somehow connected to the city. They would get in the car and they would go to the doctor, or they would go to the government. And what Todd, the father, says is, we're not going to do that. We're going to play sick, and we're going to hide in our house, and we're going to ride this thing out. And at night, I'm going to go to all the houses of the dead people that I can find. I'm going to steal all their food. And that, to me, was sort of that mentality creeping in to say, all right, so he's surviving because he is making those different decisions than a citizen who's just following the rules would make.
Yeah, I see where you're going with that. Yeah, I think that's true. I think some of that would also depend how deep down the rabbit hole or how much of a planner I think the prepper themselves were. But yeah, I think overall, I think the decisions he was making were in line with what the kinds of decisions a lot of preppers would make.
And they did come from my 80s upbringing. The government is sort of that big evil that you talk about. In almost all of those books, movies, TV shows, there's always sort of this overarching evil government that at some point is trying to control you, grab you and test your blood, or do something to, I don't even know if they portray it as for the greater good, but there was definitely, in my mind growing up, and I don't know if this is part of your culture growing up, that was sort of the fear you had of, if something happens, the government's not really going to be behind me. They're actually going to be trying to grab me and do something to me.
Yeah, it was that, and I don't know that I would say, I think maybe as a kid I would have thought of it as evil or something like that, but I think as adult I would think of it more as just more CYA and incompetence on their part than out and out evil. But yeah, I know exactly where you're going with that. And I had that because I grew up about the same age as you are, so I grew up with that same kind of 80s vibe.
And you you asked me, has the book changed me a little bit? I laughed because I went up to visit my parents this summer, and we usually drive, and we have to be on the New Jersey Turnpike. And I know you're in Houston. I don't know if you've ever done that. So New Jersey, they have giant solar panels powering all of the street lights. And I thought in my mind, oh, I wish I was still writing The Last Drive, because I would have them picking these up as we went.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'd have them stop and grab the solar panel and put it in the back of the vehicle and keep going, because you're going to need power sources and things like that. But it is funny that now I look at ways that if the shit hits the fan, I'm going to the New Jersey Turnpike and I'm stealing every solar panel I can get. Or they have these composting trash cans at all the public parks here in Raleigh, and they all have solar cells on the top, and I'm like, I'm going to all those trash cans. I got to figure out how to use that.
That's pretty.
Don't tell anybody about this.
No.
Kids are like, what are you talking about?
That's a pretty good one. Yeah, definitely keep it secret. That's a good one. We will.
Don't say it on a podcast.
Right. Never give it away on a podcast. Well, cool, man. So let's move on to the lightning round. And I think I've adjusted these questions just slightly, since you are not yourself a prepper, which is fine. So let's begin with, what is the best $100 you've ever spent on becoming a writer, or perhaps even getting your book published?
We cheated a little bit. And I told you I was going to go counter on this. I have spent very little on The Last Tribe, sometimes to my detriment. I do need to get a website. I do need to spend more money. What I have found is $100 is the least amount of money that you'll possibly find to spend in this industry, particularly self-publishing. I would say worry about how much you are spending on self-publishing. I did have Finding Daniel professionally edited, found a good editor that had a fantastic background. I would say that's the best money I've spent. It was significantly more than $100.
Oh, yeah.
You will find out to have someone edit.
Good editors are A, hard to find, B, expensive. Yeah.
Yes, and she's a copy editor, and she's fantastic, and I'm not giving her name out because I don't want her to get swamped with work. And one of the things that's tough is there are no ratings as far as editors, copy editors. You could be getting a 24-year-old who's just a grad student who's like, well, I know grammar. I'll go ahead and do this for, $1,500. Or you can be getting someone who's been in the industry for 30 years, like I was lucky enough to find. And you have to do your research, because there are people that will charge you to make a cover when you can go online and do it yourself. There are people that will charge you to literally put your book on Amazon for you, and they'll charge you $1,000, and you can just go and upload your file. It costs nothing, and it's very simple. So people who want to self-publish, I say go ahead and do it. It's fun. It's fantastic. Amazon gives you these graphs. You can go on every day and look and see your sales and be happy. But watch out for the people that want you to spend a lot of money to do that, because it can be a vanity press in a lot of situations, and you don't want to spend too much on a vanity press.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I did forget one more thing, Aaron, if I could. Part of my backstory, and you'll find this amusing because you've been in the industry for a while. So I put the book online. I don't expect it to really do well. It starts doing really well, and I get an email via LinkedIn from Podium Publishing, which is an audio publisher.
Mm-hmm.
Their big book was The Martian, the movie, Matt Damon, et cetera. They found that author, who was also self-published at the time. They send me an email, and they're like, we want to talk. We want to sign the rights to The Last Tribe. Honestly, I thought it was a joke. I'm like, whatever. I send them a note. They call me. I'm like, who is this? So I have been lucky, blessed, whatever sort of wording you want to use. They picked me up, signed me. They have created a fantastic audio version. It's on Audible, and so when people asked, "Are you published? Do you have a publisher?" I can now say I have Podium Publishing. They're just fantastic, and I was very lucky to get that. I have friends, they do their own audio copy, and I would say do that as well. It's another piece of advice for the self-published. You can just read your own book, record it on the computer, and put it up on Audible. Totally free, and it's another channel of marketing. So that was the extremely long answer to what's the best $100.
No, and I think that's good advice, I think, for any authors wanting to get out there. And I know there's a lot of books that I get pitched for people wanting to be on the show and stuff like that and get exposure for their books. And there's not an audible version of it, or if they can't send me audio files of it, I usually turn them down because I'm just like, I just don't have time to sit and focus on a book like that. Whereas if it's in audio, I can put it on while I'm doing housework or driving or doing whatever else and actually get through it in a reasonable amount of time. It's pretty rare these days that I actually pick up a physical book and will sit there and read it. So that's really cool advice, I think, that you've given it. And speaking of advice, what do you think? What is the best advice you've ever been given as a writer that you would impart to other writers?
Well, I mean, I could actually harken back to about an hour ago when we were talking and when you were saying, get a darn webpage and promote yourself a little bit.
Don't make me have to dig through the internet. Don't make me have to do a reverse image search of your face so that I can find you on LinkedIn and message you.
The advice you gave me is fantastic. It is really the self-promoting. I don't know if I would say read the Stephen King book on writing, and it's going to help you if you're serious about sitting down and writing a book and you have an idea. It definitely, it's not like this is how you write a book, steps 1, 2, 3, but I think it's more of an overarching, how do you want to be a writer? And that book is fantastic advice on that. And honestly, bouncing it off someone who does marketing like yourself, who can say, hey, you've written a book and it's selling, you need to promote yourself. And that's something that people have told me. My wife has done a fantastic job promoting me, but that would be the advice that I should be taking and receive a lot. And I would give to people is promote yourself. Realize that you're the product and you need to get yourself out there.
Mm-hmm. That's a good one. What can readers expect from you in the future?
So I have a couple of projects that go back into the science fiction space, and I'm finishing one right now that's more of a novella. And I didn't know that The Last Tribe was going to be considered post-apocalyptic. I have one that I read online. It's called more of a climate fiction that just talks about, what happens if one of these horrible climate-ending scenarios happens, and I take it 80 years in the future and look at what the last remnants of the human society looks like and how people are surviving and things like that. So I go back sort of into that dystopian. Finding Daniel, which I put out, has nothing to do with post-apocalypse.
Yes.
So if anybody who's read The Last Tribe looks at that and says, oh, they're trying to find more survivors. Daniel's no, it is not post-apocalyptic at all, and you will be very disappointed and angry. So Finding Daniel is a kidnapping suspense book.
Okay.
And what I try to do is similar to what you pointed out in The Last Tribe, is I look at it as a normal person. Not that I am normal, but what happens if the apocalypse happens and you're not a former Ranger or a former SEAL?
Mm-hmm.
And what I looked at with Finding Daniel is, you see movies like Taken, or you read a Jack Reacher book, and you're like, well, that's great if you're special ops and your daughter gets kidnapped and you can go kick somebody's ass. But what happens if and I make the hero or the main character a dentist? I'm like, what happens if you're a dentist? What do you do?
Uh-huh.
What happens if you're a dentist and that nefarious people have kidnapped your kid and the police aren't being helpful and you all of a sudden have to try and navigate the underworld of your city and get beat up and, you can't defend yourself. You don't have guns, so that was really what I was trying to do with Finding Daniel. And I like it. And so it was similar in that vein and that's really what The Last Tribe is what happens if the apocalypse happens and you're not a prepper and you've still got to figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
But I do have a couple of books coming out that are back in the science fiction vein because as a writer, I have found that that's where I'm more comfortable. One is I can make it all up. I don't have to do research, which is more fun for me. I don't get emails about you can't go left off that street. Where did you come up with that sort of thing?
Mm-hmm.
Because I could just make up the street. So that's more fun to me.
Well, very cool. So you don't have a website yet, but you're going to get one soon. I know it.
I will have one very soon, I promise. And I will be writing Aaron an email with the link. Absolutely, and I apologize, but it's kind of fun for him to look for people.
Exactly.
Like being
Yes.
a private eye.
I love scavenger hunts. I really do. So in the meantime, how can listeners connect with you? And if they go check out their book and they say, I like this Brad guy, he's my kind of crazy. How can they connect with you and find out what comes next?
I'm on Amazon. I have an author's webpage that is very poorly done that should link to me. I also have a LinkedIn page, Brad Manuel. I have a Facebook page. So I am out there on the normal social media. I'm on Twitter. I'm Brad W. Manuel. So I have the social media. I don't utilize it as well as I should. But now that I've had my talking to from Aaron, I will definitely get onto that quickly.
Awesome. Well, Brad, I sure appreciate you coming on today and sharing with us a little bit about your book and about you as a writer. It was neat stuff.
Well, and I want to say, thank you very much, Aaron, for having me on. And when I put the book out, I did not know how fantastic the fans in this genre are, and it has really just been. Again, the pretentious meter is going to go off. It has been so rewarding because all of the post-apocalyptic fans, they're so loyal and they are looking for new material. And a lot of other genres, they won't go to self-published books. And I think you're very underserved in the published world. So thank you to anyone listening to this podcast. If you have purchased my book, or even if you're just going to the self-published section, it's been fantastic, and I appreciate the support.
Show notes, links to Brad, and links to resources mentioned in this episode can be found at intherabbithole.com/E199. Support the show and get great membership benefits. Visit ITRH.net. You see, In the Rabbit Hole is supported and kept on the air nearly entirely from support by listeners just like you. That's how we pay the web host, pay the media host, and all the other things it takes to make this show available to you. Again, visit ITRH.net to find out how you can become part of the roving horde armada. And with that, we wrap up episode number 199 from the Lone Star State. Till next time, stay safe and sound.